The truth has a cruel way of returning when we least expect it. Khalil Al-Rashid, a 52-year-old Arab billionaire, believed his $8 billion fortune could buy anything, including silence about his past mistakes. But when a 28-year-old black lawyer appeared at the door of his Beverly Hills mansion, carrying documents that would make his world collapse, Khalil discovered that some debts cannot be paid with money. It was a typical Tuesday morning in December, when the golden gates of the Al-Rashid mansion opened to reveal a scene of absolute luxury. The $50 million property stretched across 5 acres of perfectly manicured gardens, with Italian marble fountains and a driveway lined with exotic palm trees. Inside the mansion's main hall, with its 30-foot cathedral ceilings and crystal chandeliers imported from Vienna, Khalil Al-Rashid sat in his leather office chair, reviewing financial reports that showed his real estate empire had grown another $200 million in the last quarter. At 52, Khalil was the embodiment of ruthless success. His black hair was impeccably styled, his Armani suit cost more than most people's annual salary, and his cold, dark eyes reflected the calculating mind of a man who had built his fortune by crushing anyone who dared to stand in his way. He controlled over 2,000 luxury properties across California, owned 3 private jets, and had a yacht anchored in Marina del Rey that was larger than most people's homes. The sound of the mansion's doorbell echoed through the marble halls. Khalil frowned, checking his Rolex Submariner. He wasn't expecting anyone, and his assistant always announced scheduled visits through the intercom system. Through the security monitors, he could see a young black man in an expensive navy suit, carrying a leather briefcase and standing confidently at the main entrance. Another delivery person who doesn't know how to use the service entrance, Khalil muttered to himself, pressing the intercom button. The delivery entrance is around. Back, leave whatever you have with the security guard, but the young man didn't move. Instead, he looked directly at the camera and spoke in a clear, educated voice. Mr. Al-Rashid, my name is Marcus Williams. I'm an attorney, and I need to speak with you about Grace Williams. This is regarding a legal matter that requires your immediate attention. The name Grace Williams hit Khalil like a physical blow. His hands trembled slightly as memories he had buried for 15 years came flooding back. Grace Williams, the 35-year-old black maid who had worked in his house, the woman he had accused of theft and destroyed without a second thought. But that was ancient history. What could her son possibly want from him now? Khalil buzzed the gates, open, and watched through the monitors as Marcus walked up the marble steps with the confidence of someone who belonged in such luxurious surroundings. This wasn't the scared 13-year-old boy who had cried when his mother was dragged away by security guards. This was a Harvard-educated attorney who carried himself like he owned the world. When Khalil opened the massive oak doors, he was struck by Marcus's presence. The young man was tall, well-built, and wore his success like armor. His suit was tailored perfectly, his shoes were Italian leather, and his briefcase was the kind that cost $10,000. But it was his eyes that unsettled Khalil the most. They held the same fierce determination that Grace Williams had shown, even in her darkest moments. Mr. Al-Rashid, Marcus said, extending a perfectly manicured hand, thank you for agreeing to see me. I believe we have much to discuss about my mother and the injustice she suffered in this very house 15 years ago. Khalil reluctantly shook the young man's hand, noting the firmness of his grip and the expensive watch on his wrist. I'm not sure what you think there is to discuss, Mr. Williams. That matter was resolved long ago. Your mother was terminated for cause, and I owe no explanations to anyone. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That's exactly the attitude I expected from you. The same arrogance that destroyed an innocent woman's life and condemned a 13-year-old boy to poverty. But I'm not that helpless child anymore, Mr. Al-Rashid. I'm a partner at Morrison, Klein and Associates. I graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Law, and I have resources you can't imagine. More importantly, I have the truth. The confidence in Marcus's voice sent a chill down Khalil's spine. He led the young lawyer into his office, a room designed to intimidate with its massive mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling law books, and oil paintings of Arab sheikhs from centuries past. But Marcus seemed completely unimpressed, taking in the opulent surroundings with the casual air of someone accustomed to wealth. "Before we begin," Marcus said, opening his briefcase and pulling out a digital recorder, "I want you to know that this conversation is being recorded. Everything you say today will be documented and can be used as evidence in legal proceedings. Do you consent to this recording?" Khalil's lawyer instincts kicked in. "I don't consent to any recording, and I think this meeting is over before it began." "That's your right," Marcus replied calmly, putting the recorder away. "But then I'll have no choice but to file the criminal complaints I've prepared and turn over all the evidence I've gathered to the appropriate authorities. I was hoping we could handle this privately, but if you prefer a public spectacle," the threat hung in the air like smoke. Khalil studied the young man's face, looking for signs of bluff, but found only steely determination. Whatever Marcus had discovered, he was clearly prepared to use it. "What exactly do you think you know about your mother's termination?" Khalil asked, trying to maintain his authoritative tone. Marcus pulled out a thick folder and spread several documents across the mahogany desk. "I know everything, Mr. Al-Rashid. I know about the $200,000 diamond necklace that mysteriously disappeared. I know about how you immediately accused my mother without any investigation. I know about how you had her arrested in front of the other staff members, how you blacklisted her from ever working in Beverly Hills again, and how you destroyed her reputation so thoroughly that she could never find decent employment." Each word was like a dagger, delivered with surgical precision. Khalil felt sweat beginning to form on his forehead, despite the mansion's perfect climate control. "But what you don't know," Marcus continued, "is what happened to my mother after you threw her out like garbage. You don't know about the nights she cried herself to sleep, wondering how she would pay rent. You don't know about the times we went without food because she couldn't find work. You don't know about how a proud, dignified woman was reduced to cleaning office buildings at night for minimum wage, always looking over her shoulder, afraid that somehow your influence would reach her even there." The young lawyer's voice remained steady, but Khalil could see the pain behind his composed exterior. This wasn't just about legal justice. This was personal. Marcus pulled out more documents. "After you destroyed her life, my mother had to move us to a one-bedroom apartment in South Central. I had to leave my private school and attend public school in one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Los Angeles. Do you know what it's like for a 13-year-old boy to watch his mother's spirit slowly die while she struggles to keep food on the table?" Khalil shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had never considered what happened to Grace and her son after they left his property. In his mind, they had simply ceased to exist, like all the other problems he had eliminated from his life. "Marcus, what's your point in telling me this ancient history? If you're looking for sympathy, you won't find it here. Your mother was terminated for theft, and that's the end of the story." The young lawyer's eyes flashed with controlled anger. "Theft? Is that what you still believe? Even after all these years, you're still convinced that my mother, a woman who worked 16 hours a day to support her son, would risk everything to steal from you?" "The evidence was clear," Khalil insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "The necklace was missing, and she had access to the bedroom." Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small digital device. "Mr. Al-Rashid, I want you to listen to something. This is a recording my mother made 2 years ago, just before she died of cancer. She knew she was dying, and she wanted to make sure the truth was preserved. Before Khalil could protest, Marcus pressed play. Grace Williams's voice filled the room, weak from illness, but still carrying the dignity that Khalil remembered. "My name is Grace Williams, and I want to tell the truth about what happened in the Al-Rashid house in December 2008. I was accused of stealing a diamond necklace worth $200,000. I never stole anything in my life. I worked honest jobs since I was 16 years old, and I raised my son to understand the value of integrity above all else." Khalil felt his chest tighten as he heard the voice of the woman he had destroyed. Her words continued. "Mr. Al-Rashid never investigated what really happened to that necklace. He never asked questions, never looked at security footage, never considered that maybe someone else in that house knew where it was. He just saw a black maid and assumed she was a thief. That assumption destroyed my life and nearly destroyed my son's future." Marcus paused the recording and looked directly at Khalil. "She's right, isn't she? You never investigated. You saw a missing necklace and immediately blamed the black woman who cleaned your house. It was easier than considering that maybe someone in your own family was responsible." The accusation hung heavy in the air. Khalil's mouth felt dry as memories of that day came flooding back. He remembered his wife Amira's hysteria when she discovered the necklace was missing from her jewelry box. He remembered how quickly he had called Grace into his office, how he had accused her without hesitation, how satisfied he had felt when security escorted her from the property in handcuffs. "Even if I made a mistake," Khalil said defensively, "that was 15 years ago. There's nothing to be gained by relitigating the past." Marcus smiled coldly. "Oh, but there's so much more to this story, Mr. Al-Rashid. You see, my mother didn't just clean your house. She observed your family, she listened to conversations, and she learned things about your business dealings that you never suspected a simple maid would understand. If this story of family secrets and devastating truths has captured your attention, drop the word justice in the comments below and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories that will leave you speechless." The smile on Marcus's face grew wider as he saw the fear creeping into Khalil's eyes. "You want to know what my mother really discovered in your house, Mr. Al-Rashid? She found out about your offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. She knew about the shell companies you used to launder money from questionable real estate deals. She understood that your legitimate business empire was built on a foundation of corruption that would make international headlines if it ever came to light." Khalil's face went pale. "That's impossible. Grace was just a maid. She couldn't have understood complex financial arrangements." "That's where you made your biggest mistake," Marcus replied, pulling out more documents from his briefcase. "You underestimated her intelligence because of her job and her race. What you didn't know is that before she became a domestic worker, my mother had completed 2 years of accounting school. She understood exactly what she was seeing when she cleaned your office and organized your personal papers." The revelation hit Khalil like a physical blow. He had always been careless with sensitive documents when Grace was around, assuming that a black maid wouldn't understand the significance of financial records or legal contracts. Marcus continued his devastating exposition. "While she cleaned your desk, my mother photographed dozens of documents with a small camera she bought with her savings. She documented wire transfers to phantom companies, recorded conversations between you and your business partners about bribing city officials, and she even found evidence of your involvement in a money laundering scheme that processed over $500 million through fake property sales." "You're lying," Khalil whispered, but his voice carried no conviction. Marcus opened his laptop and turned it toward Khalil. The screen showed copies of bank statements, legal documents, and recorded phone conversations. "My mother spent months gathering this evidence because she believed that powerful people like you should be held accountable for your crimes. She was planning to turn everything over to the FBI when you accused her of theft and destroyed her life. Khalil stared at the evidence in horror. Every document was authentic, every conversation was real, and every financial transaction was documented with precision that would satisfy any court in the country. The irony, Marcus said, closing the laptop, is that you destroyed the one person who could have exposed you years ago. When you had my mother arrested and blacklisted, you actually protected yourself from the consequences of your crimes. But you also created an enemy who would never forget what you did to her. "What do you want?" Khalil asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus leaned back in his chair, savoring the moment he had planned for years. "I want justice for my mother. I want accountability for the crimes you've committed. And I want you to understand that the woman you treated like garbage was worth 1,000 of you." He pulled out another device, this one larger and more sophisticated. "This contains copies of every piece of evidence my mother gathered, plus additional documentation I've collected over the past 5 years. Financial records showing that your real estate empire is built on money laundered from drug cartels, recordings of you bribing city council members to approve questionable development projects, and proof that you've evaded over $200 million in federal taxes." Khalil felt his world crumbling around him. "How did you get access to all of this? Money opens many doors, Mr. Al-Rashid, and I've made quite a lot of money as a lawyer specializing in white-collar crime. I've spent the last 5 years of my life and over $2 million of my own money investigating every aspect of your business empire. I know about accounts you've forgotten you opened, properties you bought under assumed names, and crimes you committed so long ago that you probably think the statute of limitations has expired." Marcus stood up and walked to the window overlooking the mansion's gardens. "Do you see those beautiful gardens, Mr. Al-Rashid? My mother used to tend those flowers. She took pride in making your property beautiful, even though you paid her starvation wages and treated her like she was invisible. She loved those roses because they reminded her of the garden her grandmother had in Alabama before she moved to California, looking for a better life. The personal details cut deeper than any legal threat." Khalil had never seen Grace as a real person with dreams, memories, and feelings. To him, she had been nothing more than a domestic worker who could be discarded at will. "But here's what you don't know about that necklace," Marcus said, turning back to face Khalil with a triumphant smile. "The one thing that will destroy not just your business empire, but your marriage and your standing in Beverly Hills society." Khalil's hands were now visibly shaking. "What are you talking about?" Marcus pulled out a final recording device, this one smaller than the others. "This is a conversation that took place 3 weeks after my mother was arrested. The participants are your wife, Amira, and her best friend, Sophia Hassan. They were having lunch at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and they thought they were completely private." He pressed play, and Amira's voice filled the room, speaking in a casual, laughing tone. "Can you believe how easy it was to blame that stupid black maid for my carelessness? I had loaned the necklace to my sister for her anniversary party and completely forgot about it. When I realized it was missing, I panicked and told Khalil it was stolen. He immediately assumed it was Grace, and I just went along with it. The poor woman never had a chance." Sophia's voice responded with amusement. "And now she's in jail while you get insurance money for a necklace that was never actually stolen. That's brilliant, Amira." Amira's laughter was audible on the recording. "The best part is that Khalil still doesn't know the truth. He thinks he's such a smart businessman, but he can't even figure out that his own wife made him look like a fool. That necklace was in my sister's jewelry box the whole time." The recording continued for several more minutes, with Amira describing in detail how she had manipulated the situation to avoid admitting her mistake, how she had encouraged Khalil's racist assumptions about Grace, and how she had even suggested calling the police to make the false accusation seem more credible. When the recording ended, the office was filled with absolute silence. Khalil sat motionless, processing the fact that his wife had not only lied to him, but had actively participated in destroying an innocent woman's life to cover up her own negligence. Your wife found the necklace in her sister's house 2 days after my mother was arrested, Marcus said quietly. She never told you because she was embarrassed about her mistake and amused by how easily she could manipulate you into blaming a black woman for her own carelessness. Khalil felt nauseous. For 15 years, he had believed he was justified in his actions. He had told himself that Grace Williams was a thief who deserved everything that happened to her. Now he was learning that he had been played for a fool by his own wife, and that an innocent woman had suffered because of his prejudices and assumptions. "How did you get this recording?" he asked weakly. "Sophia Hassan's son is a friend of mine from law school," Marcus replied. "When I told him what I was investigating, he remembered his mother mentioning this conversation years ago. He convinced her to help me by wearing a wire during lunch with your wife last month. Amira was happy to brag about her deception all over again." This incredible story is about to reach its most shocking conclusion, but first, I want you to know that the best is yet to come. If you're amazed by how this young man planned his revenge, make sure to subscribe, because the final revelation will leave you speechless. Marcus walked back to Khalil's desk and spread out a new set of documents. "Now that you understand the full scope of what you've done and what I know about your crimes, let me explain what's going to happen next." He placed a thick legal contract in front of Khalil. "You have exactly 48 hours to establish the Grace Williams Foundation with an initial endowment of $50 million. This foundation will provide scholarships, legal aid, and job training for children of domestic workers who have been wrongfully terminated or discriminated against." Khalil looked at the contract in shock. $50 million, that's extortion. "No," Marcus replied calmly, "that's justice. My mother's life was worth infinitely more than $50 million, but that amount will help prevent other families from suffering what we endured." He placed additional documents on the desk. "You will also make a public statement confessing to the false accusation against my mother, admitting that she was innocent of any wrongdoing, and acknowledging that your actions were based on racial prejudice and poor judgment." "I'll be ruined," Khalil protested. "My reputation, my business relationships, everything I've built will be destroyed." Marcus's eyes grew cold. "Everything you built was constructed on lies, corruption, and the suffering of people like my mother. It deserves to be destroyed, but if you comply with these terms, I'll keep the evidence of your financial crimes sealed. You'll lose your reputation, but you'll avoid spending the next 20 years in federal prison." He pulled out his phone and showed Khalil a contact list. "I have the direct numbers for FBI agent Sarah Chen, who specializes in white-collar crime, IRS Criminal Investigation Division Chief Michael Torres, and Los Angeles Times investigative journalist Rebecca Martinez. One phone call from me, and by tomorrow morning your face will be on the front page of every newspaper in America under headlines about international money laundering and tax evasion." Khalil's mind raced, trying to find an escape route. What about the statute of limitations? Some of these alleged crimes happened years ago. "Money laundering and tax evasion are continuing crimes," Marcus replied with a lawyer's precision. "Every day you fail to report hidden income or continue to use laundered funds, you commit new violations. And conspiracy to commit fraud has no statute of limitations when the conspiracy involves ongoing criminal activity." The young lawyer sat back down and fixed Khalil with an unwavering stare. "But let's talk about something more personal than legal technicalities. Do you know how my mother died, Mr. Al-Rashid?" The question caught Khalil off guard. "I assumed it was natural causes." "You mentioned cancer." "Breast cancer," Marcus said, his voice heavy with emotion. "A disease that's very treatable when caught early and when the patient has access to quality health care. But my mother didn't have health insurance because she could never find stable employment after you destroyed her reputation. By the time she could afford to see a doctor, the cancer had metastasized to her liver and bones. Khalil felt a crushing weight of guilt settling on his chest. Marcus continued. She spent her last 6 months in a charity hospital, sharing a room with 3 other women, receiving substandard treatment because she couldn't afford private care. She died holding my hand, apologizing to me for not being able to provide a better life, still believing that somehow her failure to prove her innocence was what condemned us to poverty. Tears were flowing freely down Marcus's face now, though. His voice remained steady. Even on her deathbed, she worried about what would happen to me. She made me promise that I would use my education to help other people who were treated the way she was, that I wouldn't let bitterness consume me, and that I would always remember that she was proud of the man I had become, despite everything we went through. The office was silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Khalil found himself unable to speak, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the suffering his actions had caused. "For 2 years after she died," Marcus said, wiping his eyes, "I wanted nothing but revenge. I wanted to destroy you completely, to take everything you had and leave you with nothing. I spent sleepless nights planning how I would expose your crimes, ruin your marriage, and watch you lose everything that mattered to you." He stood up and walked to a family photograph on Khalil's desk, showing the billionaire with his wife and 2 teenage children. But then I realized that revenge wasn't what my mother would have wanted. She would have wanted justice, not just for herself, but for all the other people you've hurt over the years. She would have wanted your wealth to be used to help others, not just to satisfy my anger. Marcus turned back to face Khalil. "So I'm offering you a choice, Mr. Al-Rashid. You can choose justice. Admit your mistakes, compensate your victims, and use your remaining wealth to make amends. Or you can choose destruction. Fight these allegations in court, watch your crimes be exposed in the media, and spend your remaining years in federal prison while your family suffers the consequences of your actions." He placed a pen on the contract. "The Grace Williams Foundation will provide scholarships for deserving students, legal aid for workers who face discrimination, and job training programs for people who have been blacklisted by powerful employers. Your $50 million will help hundreds of families avoid the poverty and desperation that my mother and I endured." Khalil stared at the contract, his mind reeling. Everything he had worked for, every business relationship he had cultivated, every social connection he had built, all of it would be destroyed if he signed these papers. But the alternative was even worse. Public humiliation, criminal prosecution, and the complete annihilation of everything he had built. "And if I refuse?" he asked quietly. Marcus smiled grimly. "Then tomorrow morning, the FBI will receive copies of all the evidence I've gathered, along with a detailed report of your money laundering operations. The IRS will receive documentation of your tax evasion. The Los Angeles Times will receive copies of the recordings proving you falsely accused, my mother. And Beverly Hills society will learn that their respected billionaire is nothing more than a common criminal who destroyed an innocent woman's life to protect his own ego." He leaned forward across the desk. "But more than that, you'll have to live with the knowledge that you had a chance to do the right thing, to honor my mother's memory, and to prevent other families from suffering what we went through. And you chose selfishness instead." Khalil picked up the pen with trembling hands. His signature on this contract would cost him $50 million, his reputation, and his standing in the community. But his refusal would cost him everything else: his freedom, his family's future, and any chance of redemption. As he signed his name to the document, Khalil Al-Rashid realized that the son of the woman he had destroyed had become more powerful than he had ever been, not through inheritance or corruption, but through intelligence, determination, and an unshakable commitment to justice. "There's one more thing," Marcus said as he collected the signed contracts. "I want you to know that I forgive you, not because you deserve forgiveness, but because my mother taught me that hatred only destroys the person who carries it. But forgiveness doesn't mean there won't be consequences for your actions." He closed his briefcase and stood up to leave. "The foundation will be established within 30 days. Your public statement, admitting to the false accusation against my mother, will be made at a press conference next week. And every year on the anniversary of her death, you will personally present scholarships to deserving students in her memory." As Marcus walked toward the door, Khalil found his voice one last time. "What happens now? What happens to me?" Marcus paused at the threshold of the office. "You'll live with the truth, Mr. Al-Rashid. You'll wake up every morning knowing that your prejudice and arrogance destroyed an innocent woman's life. You'll go to sleep every night remembering that your actions condemned a 13-year-old boy to poverty and nearly destroyed his future. And hopefully, someday, you'll understand that the greatest tragedy isn't what you've lost, but what you never allowed yourself to see in the people you considered beneath you." 6 months after that confrontation in the Beverly Hills mansion, the transformation was complete. Khalil Al-Rashid stood at a podium in the ballroom of the Beverly Hills Hotel, facing a crowd of reporters, community leaders, and scholarship recipients from the Grace Williams Foundation. His once immaculate appearance showed the toll that truth had taken on his life. His hair had gone gray, his expensive suits couldn't hide the weight he had lost from stress, and his eyes carried the heavy burden of a man who finally understood the full cost of his actions. "Ladies and gentlemen," Khalil said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I stand before you today to acknowledge one of the greatest injustices I have ever committed. 15 years ago, I falsely accused Grace Williams, a dedicated employee and devoted mother, of theft. This accusation was based not on evidence, but on prejudice, assumptions, and the kind of racial bias that has no place in civilized society. The room was completely silent. Cameras flashed as reporters documented the fall of one of Beverly Hills' most powerful men. Grace Williams was innocent of any wrongdoing," Khalil continued, his voice growing stronger. "She was terminated from her position based solely on my preconceptions about who she was and what she was capable of. My actions destroyed her career, condemned her family to poverty, and ultimately contributed to her death from an illness she couldn't afford to treat properly." In the audience, Marcus Williams sat in the front row, wearing the same navy suit he had worn to their first confrontation. Next to him sat dozens of scholarship recipients, young people from backgrounds similar to his own, who would now have opportunities that might otherwise have been denied to them. "The Grace Williams Foundation," Khalil said, "represents more than just financial compensation for the harm I caused. It represents a commitment to ensuring that other families don't suffer the injustices that Grace Williams and her son endured because of my actions." As Khalil spoke, his wife Amira was conspicuously absent. Their divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier, with Amira receiving a settlement that was considerably smaller than she had expected. The recordings of her bragging about manipulating the situation had made her a pariah in Beverly Hills society, and she had moved to New York to escape the scandal. The foundation had already awarded its first round of scholarships, providing full college tuition for 50 students whose parents worked as domestic employees, janitors, security guards, and other service jobs. Additionally, the foundation provided legal aid for workers who faced discrimination, job training programs for those seeking to advance their careers, and emergency financial assistance for families dealing with medical crises. Marcus had used his legal expertise to structure the foundation in a way that would maximize its impact while ensuring that Khalil could never regain control of the funds. The billionaire was required to contribute an additional $10 million each year for the next decade, and every decision about the foundation's activities had to be approved by a board of directors that included community leaders, civil rights attorneys, and representatives from labor unions. After the press conference, Marcus approached Khalil as reporters packed up their equipment and scholarship recipients mingled with their families. "Mr. Al-Rashid," Marcus said formally, "I want to thank you for honoring our agreement and for taking responsibility for your actions." Khalil looked at the young man who had so completely changed his life. "I don't deserve your thanks, Marcus. Nothing I do can bring your mother back or undo the suffering I caused." "That's true," Marcus replied, "but what you're doing now will prevent other families from going through what we went through. That's what my mother would have wanted." Khalil nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about what you said that day in my office, about how I never saw your mother as a real person. You were right. I saw her as nothing more than hired help, someone whose feelings and circumstances were irrelevant to me. It's a blindness that I'm only now beginning to understand. The tragedy," Marcus said, "is that my mother was an extraordinary woman. She was intelligent, hard-working, and devoted to her family. She could have accomplished amazing things if she had been given the opportunities that people like you take for granted. Instead, she spent her life cleaning other people's houses and wondering why the world treated her like she was invisible." Khalil's eyes filled with tears. "I know that now. I know that I destroyed something precious and irreplaceable because of my arrogance and prejudice. I know that I can never fully atone for what I did, but you can honor her memory," Marcus said. "Every student who receives a scholarship, every worker who gets legal help, every family that avoids poverty because of this foundation, they're all part of Grace Williams' legacy now. She's helping people even though she's gone, and that would make her proud." As they spoke, a young Latina woman approached them. She was Maria Santos, one of the foundation's first scholarship recipients, whose mother worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families in Malibu. "Mr. Williams," Maria said shyly, "I wanted to thank you for what you've done. Because of the foundation, I'm going to be able to study engineering at UCLA. My mother cried when she found out. Happy tears for the first time in years." Marcus smiled warmly at the young woman. "Your success will be the greatest tribute to my mother's memory. She always believed that education was the key to breaking the cycle of poverty and discrimination." Maria turned to Khalil. "Mr. Al-Rashid, I know what you did was wrong, but I also know that admitting your mistakes and trying to make things right takes courage. My family appreciates what you're doing now." After Maria left to rejoin her family, Khalil and Marcus stood together in the emptying ballroom. The contrast between them was stark. Marcus, confident and successful, representing the triumph of justice over prejudice, while Khalil appeared diminished, a powerful man brought low by the consequences of his own actions. "What will you do now?" Marcus asked. Khalil sighed deeply. "I'm selling the mansion. It holds too many painful memories, and I need the money to fulfill my obligations to the foundation. I'm moving to a smaller house, and I'm scaling back my business operations. I've lost most of my high-profile clients because of the scandal, but perhaps that's appropriate. And your family? My children are struggling to understand how their father could have done something so wrong. My relationship with them may never fully recover. But they're young, and perhaps in time they'll see that people can change, that mistakes can be acknowledged and addressed." Marcus nodded. "Redemption is a long process, Mr. Al-Rashid. It requires more than writing checks and making public statements. It requires a fundamental change in how you see other people and how you use whatever power and privilege you have left." "I'm trying to learn," Khalil admitted. I'm reading books about racism and discrimination that I never bothered to read before. I'm volunteering at homeless shelters and food banks, trying to understand the lives of people I used to ignore. It's humbling to realize how much of the world I was blind to. Marcus extended his hand. My mother always said that it's never too late for people to become better than they were. I hope she was right about you. As they shook hands, both men understood that this moment represented more than just the resolution of a legal dispute. It was the end of one man's journey toward accountability and the beginning of another man's mission to ensure that his mother's suffering had meaning. 2 years later, Marcus Williams stood at his mother's grave in Forest Lawn Memorial Park, holding a letter that had arrived that morning. The letter was from Maria Santos, who had just graduated summa cum laude from UCLA with a degree in civil engineering. She had accepted a position with a prestigious firm and was engaged to be married to a fellow engineer she had met in school. "The Grace Williams Foundation changed my life," Maria had written. "But more than that, it showed me that even when terrible injustices happen, people can work together to make sure they never happen again. Your mother's legacy lives on in every student who gets an opportunity they wouldn't have had otherwise." Marcus placed fresh flowers on his mother's grave and read the letter aloud, as he did with all the letters from scholarship recipients. Over the past 2 years, the foundation had helped over 200 students attend college, provided legal assistance to dozens of workers facing discrimination, and offered job training to hundreds of people seeking better opportunities. Khalil Al-Rashid had fulfilled every aspect of their agreement. His public confession had been featured in newspapers across the country. His financial contributions to the foundation were made punctually, and he had personally presented scholarships at every annual ceremony. More importantly, his transformation seemed genuine. He had used his remaining wealth and influence to advocate for workers' rights, support civil rights organizations, and promote diversity in the business community. "Mom," Marcus said quietly, "I hope you can see what your sacrifice accomplished. You always told me that education was the most powerful weapon against ignorance and prejudice. The foundation is proving you right, one student at a time." As Marcus walked back to his car, his phone buzzed with a text message from Khalil. "Annual scholarship ceremony is next week. 75 new recipients this year, including 15 whose parents work in domestic services. Your mother would be proud. Thank you for teaching me what justice really means." Marcus smiled as he read the message. The relationship between him and Khalil had evolved from adversarial to something approaching mutual respect. It wasn't friendship. Too much pain had been caused for that. But it was a working partnership dedicated to honoring Grace Williams' memory. The following week's scholarship ceremony was the largest yet. Held at the Beverly Hills Community Center, it brought together students from across Los Angeles County whose lives had been transformed by the foundation's support. Marcus delivered the keynote address, as he did every year, but this time his speech carried special significance. 3 years ago, Marcus began, addressing the audience of scholarship recipients, their families, and community leaders, I stood in a mansion not far from here, confronting a man who had destroyed my mother's life based on nothing more than prejudice and assumptions. I was angry, hurt, and determined to seek revenge for the injustices my family had suffered. He paused, looking out at the young faces in the audience. But as I planned my confrontation, I kept hearing my mother's voice in my head, reminding me that hatred only destroys the person who carries it. She taught me that the best response to injustice isn't more injustice, but the creation of opportunities for others to avoid the pain we experienced. In the back of the room, Khalil Al-Rashid sat quietly, no longer the commanding presence he had once been. His business empire had shrunk considerably, his social standing had never recovered, and his family relationships remained strained. But there was something in his demeanor that suggested peace, a man who had finally found purpose in making amends for his past mistakes. The Grace Williams Foundation, Marcus continued, represents more than just scholarships and legal aid. It represents the power of truth to transform lives, the importance of holding powerful people accountable for their actions, and the possibility that even the worst injustices can be turned into forces for positive change. After the ceremony, as families celebrated and students shared their dreams for the future, Marcus found himself approached by a young man he didn't recognize. The teenager was tall, well-dressed, and carried himself with confidence despite his obvious nervousness. "Mr. Williams," the young man said, "my name is David Al-Rashid. I'm Khalil Al-Rashid's son." Marcus studied the teenager's face, seeing traces of Khalil's features, but also something softer, more open. "Hello, David. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize," David said quietly, "for what my father did to your mother and to you. I know that I can't undo the past, but I want you to know that what happened to your family has changed how I see the world." Marcus was touched by the young man's sincerity. "You don't need to apologize for your father's actions, David. You weren't responsible for what happened. But I am responsible for what I do with the knowledge of what happened," David replied with wisdom beyond his years. "I'm starting college next year and I want to study social justice and public policy. I want to use whatever privileges I've inherited to help people who don't have the advantages I've been given." The conversation continued for several minutes, with David explaining how his father's public confession and involvement with the foundation had taught him about systemic racism, economic inequality, and the responsibility that comes with wealth and privilege. It was clear that Khalil's transformation had profoundly impacted his children, creating a new generation that understood the importance of using power responsibly. As the evening concluded, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 5 years earlier, he had been consumed with anger and driven by a desire for revenge. Now, he was the director of a foundation that was changing lives, a successful attorney who specialized in fighting discrimination, and a man who had found peace through the pursuit of justice rather than vengeance. The Grace Williams Foundation had grown beyond anything Marcus had initially envisioned. It now operated programs in 3 states, had awarded over $30 million in scholarships, and had provided legal assistance to more than 500 workers facing discrimination. Most importantly, it had created a model for how accountability and redemption could work together to create positive change. Khalil Al-Rashid's story had become a case study taught in business schools and ethics classes across the country. His transformation from arrogant billionaire to humble advocate for workers' rights demonstrated that even people who commit serious wrongs can find paths to redemption through genuine accountability and sustained effort to make amends. But the real legacy belonged to Grace Williams, the quiet, dignified woman who had cleaned houses and raised a son while dreaming of a world where people were judged by their character rather than their circumstances. Through her son's determination to seek justice rather than revenge, Grace had achieved something in death that had been denied to her in life: recognition as a person of worth, dignity, and immense value. The final scholarship recipient of the evening was a young woman named Grace Martinez, whose mother worked as a hotel housekeeper. When Marcus presented her with the scholarship certificate, she whispered, "I chose to keep the name Grace when I found out about your mother's story. I want to honor her memory by becoming the first person in my family to graduate from college." As Marcus drove home that night, he thought about his mother's final words to him in the hospital. "Promise me you'll use your education to help others who are treated the way I was." Promise me you won't let bitterness consume you. And promise me you'll always remember that I was proud of the man you became. He had kept all three promises. The foundation was helping others avoid the discrimination and poverty that had defined his childhood. He had chosen justice over bitterness, creating something positive from his pain. And most importantly, he had become the kind of man his mother had always believed he could be, not despite the hardships they had faced, but because of the lessons she had taught him about dignity, perseverance, and the power of education to change lives. The Grace Williams Foundation continues to operate today, having helped thousands of students pursue higher education and provided legal assistance to countless workers facing discrimination. Khalil Al-Rashid completed his 10-year commitment to the foundation and continues to support its work, having found in his efforts to make amends a purpose that his previous pursuit of wealth had never provided. Marcus Williams went on to establish a successful law firm specializing in civil rights cases and currently serves on the board of several organizations dedicated to fighting workplace discrimination. He never married, dedicating his life to the causes his mother would have supported and the students who carry on her legacy. The story of Grace Williams proves that even in death, the impact of a life lived with dignity and purpose can continue to create positive change in the world. Her son's pursuit of justice, rather than revenge, transformed a tragedy into a triumph, showing that the best way to honor those we've lost is not through acts of retribution, but through efforts to ensure that others don't suffer the same injustices. What did you think of this incredible story of transformation and redemption? Have you ever witnessed someone find the courage to admit their mistakes and work to make things right? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories that prove the power of truth, justice, and the human capacity for change. The next story we'll share will show you how one act of kindness can completely transform multiple lives in ways you never imagined possible.